Hello, you've reached episode 7 of the podcast series, The Question of God. Has our civilization outgrown God? My name is Sophie Minerva. I'm a professor of philosophy at NLA University College in Oslo. The recording you are listening to is from cafe conversations I had with 4 international students about questions related to God. They represented different positions on the God question. Our starting point was the book Outgrowing God by the well-known atheist Richard Dawkins. Among other things, the topics this time are the concepts of paradox and contradiction. What is the difference and what does it mean? The students also discussed some arguments for God's existence as summarized by the medieval philosopher Thomas Aquinas. Let's join the conversation in the cafe. Okay, everyone, good to see you again. I have started the recorder now. Last time we talked about contradictions. As you know, we pointed out that 2 assertions or propositions contradicting each other cannot both be true, and a proposition that contradicts itself cannot be true. In other words, a self-contradiction can never be true. Logical rules like these are basic in any sound reasoning and necessary if we want to find out if a proposition is true or false. You, Douglas, had a comment about a claim that Dawkins wrote in his book. He said that nobody can prove that something does not exist. But you disagreed. Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah. I pointed out that if a statement is self-contradictory or incoherent, then by definition it can't be true. True claims must be coherent. Therefore, it is possible to prove that something doesn't exist. For example, we can prove that a square circle does not exist. The proposition that a square circle exists is self-contradictory, and so cannot be true. So we can know that square circles don't exist.
Wait a second, so you mean that if a truth claim saying something exists is self-contradictory, and so false by definition, then that thing cannot possibly exist in the real world?
Yeah, Thomas. That's the amazing link between logic and reality. Self-contradictory things cannot exist in the real world. This is a basic belief in all rational reasoning, investigation, knowledge, and science.
Cool, good point. You're right, and we actually talked about this before, didn't we?
I have a question about incoherence. What if I'm not claiming that a square is circular, but that a square is happy or sad? Is that incoherent or just nonsense?
Good question, Hiromi. You looked at me, but I would like to challenge the others if they can answer. What do you think about a happy or sad square? Anyone? Yes, Douglas?
Well, Hiromi is taking categories from talk about emotions and applying them in a different context where they don't fit, namely, the context of geometry. So, what she said is incoherent in the sense that she used the laws of English grammar to force together 2 contexts of discourse that don't belong together. And so the result is a category mistake that makes no sense. In other words, it's nonsense.
This is quite interesting. Can you give some more examples, Douglas?
Well, how many meters deep do you want my examples to be, Thomas, huh? Did you get that example? There are no limits here, okay? Or if I ask, how many kilos does a mile weigh? Or how long is yellow?
Thanks, Douglas. That was actually pretty deep.
I see what you mean, Douglas. There is no coherent, sensible answer to such questions because they make a category mistake. But what's the relevance here? Does Dawkins do things like that in the book?
Before we answer that, I'd like to add something to what Douglas said about category mistakes. Notice the importance of context and interpretation here. Be attentive to creative and poetic language. Don't think too literalistically. There are statements that are literally incoherent, but that have a deeper metaphorical meaning. For example, when Shakespeare writes that all the world's a stage, we need to keep an open mind, as they say, so as not to miss something that is true at a deeper level. You see? But let's return to Hiromi's question. Do we find examples of incoherent sentences or category mistakes in Dawkins' book? Astrid?
Yes, Professor. I think Dawkins makes a category mistake when he compares polytheistic gods with the creator god of monotheism. It's not as easy to reject the existence of a creator of the cosmos as it is to reject polytheistic gods who arise within the cosmos.
Wait, so what's the difference? You'll have to explain that, Astrid.
Okay, well, polytheism has many deities, but their existence is contingent. Their powers are arbitrarily limited and their morality is flawed. They are not omnipotent, that is, they are not almighty. They have strengths but also weaknesses and moral flaws, right? You could say that the polytheistic gods are reflections of human experience and imagination, rather like superheroes.
Okay, I see that, Astrid. There are many smaller gods, millions, I would guess, and they are different from the big god of monotheism. But what about it? What real difference does it make?
Oh, there's a huge difference, Thomas. God in monotheism is understood as the foundation of all existence and the basis of both reason and morality. God has no arbitrary limits. God is totally independent, all-powerful, and wholly good.
Oh, I can see that. Of course, confusing the Almighty God with lower-level gods is making a category mistake. Thanks, Astrid.
Yes, Hiromi. And by the way, Professor Sophie, I have been reading the famous medieval theologian and philosopher, Thomas Aquinas. Do we have time for his 5 ways to argue for the existence of God?
Yes, certainly. Thomas Aquinas is one of the world's greatest philosophers, so let's consider his arguments. Go ahead, Astrid.
Okay, great. Aquinas summarized 5 arguments for the existence of God. He pointed out, in different ways, how hard it is for us to understand reality without accepting the existence of God. I have tried to sum up his 5 arguments in my own way. Number 1 is this: God is the source of all change. Why? Because every change in reality that is brought about by some other change happening must ultimately be traced to a reality that is not brought about by anything changing. In other words, all change must originate from a first changer. This ultimate source of change is God. The second argument says that God is the very first cause. Things that are caused cannot cause themselves, right? And you can't have an infinite regress of causes. So, there must be an uncaused reality behind all caused things. This uncaused reality is God.
Hang on, Astrid. Isn't that just the same argument as the first one, just expressed in a bit of a different way?
No, it isn't the same argument, Thomas, although it may sound similar.
Okay.
Both arguments are about ultimate causes, yes, but the first argument says God is the ultimate cause behind the process of one change in reality causing another. The second argument says God is the ultimate cause of existence. That is, the first cause in the chain of one thing causing the existence of another thing, you see. So, without God, not only would there be no change in things, but no things would even exist.
Okay, I need to think about that. But, well, go ahead.
Wait, I get that Aquinas thinks God is the ultimate being that explains everything that's changed by something outside of itself, and everything that's caused to exist. But don't both of those arguments assume that an infinite regress of causes can't exist?
Yes, I would agree, Douglas, that according to Aquinas, an infinite chain of causes without an ultimate cause can't exist in the real world. But he is thinking about chains of cause and effect, where every cause relies on another cause for its power, like when pedaling a bike causes the chain to turn the wheel. And Aquinas does actually argue for this premise. It's not just an assumption he makes. In any case, although the third argument from Aquinas is also about causality, it clearly tries to show we need God to explain the world whether or not an infinite past is possible.
Okay, how does the third argument go?
It goes like this. There's a whole universe of things that do not have to exist. Things could have not existed, right?
Right?
Aquinas says that because the universe is made of things that could not exist, then whether or not the universe had an infinite past, the universe that exists now must be caused by something that has necessary existence, and that's God.
Let me add a comment here, Astrid. Aquinas would say that anything that exists but can also fail to exist is a contingent thing. By contrast, anything that exists but cannot fail to exist would be a necessary thing. So things are either contingent or necessary in their existence, you see? But please continue, Astrid.
Right, thanks, Professor. Okay, so according to Aquinas, even if we suppose there was an infinite regress of contingent things in the past, we cannot avoid the need for a cause with necessary existence.
Why not?
Because if non-existence were a real possibility for every existing thing, and we assume that every possibility would be realized in an infinite amount of time, then it follows from the assumption that the past was infinite that nothing would exist by now.
But I exist, right?
Yes, exactly, Thomas. You exist. You are a contingent thing that exists now. So, even if an infinite regress of contingent things existed in the past, something must have necessary existence in order to explain your existence here and now. Can you see that? And that something with necessary existence is what we call God.
Oh gosh, I think my brain just melted.
I hope not, Thomas. You'll need your brain a bit more. There are still 2 more arguments to go, with different themes.
I will need more time to think about that third argument to be able to understand it, Astrid.
Yeah, me too.
That's fine. I can send the link to you. Okay, so Aquinas' 4th argument says that God is the ultimate standard of value or worth. If some finite things or actions are objectively better than others, there must exist a real best thing, a real standard of worth beyond those finite things or actions by which we judge them. That standard is God.
So the idea here seems to be that an objective judgment of worth requires an objective standard of worth, and the standard is God?
That's right, Hiromi.
Would that mean that God is, like, the thing most worthy of being valued?
It would. That's what it means to worship God, to assign ultimate worth to God.
Aha, I see.
The 5th and final argument from Aquinas says that God is the ultimate source of the intelligible order in the universe. The universe has an intelligible order that is more plausibly explained as being the product of intelligence than as the product of unintelligent causes. That intelligence is God. So that's it. Those are the 5 arguments from Thomas Aquinas.
This is really interesting. Thanks, Astrid.
Oh, that was a lot to process. How about a summary, Astrid?
A summary, Thomas? Okay, I'll try. In short, Aquinas says we can't coherently imagine the world without God. He poses 5 questions. Is it coherent to imagine that the flow of change exists without there being an ultimate cause of change? Does it make sense to imagine a chain of causes without a first cause? Can you explain the existence of contingent things without a necessary being behind them? Can you explain the existence of objective values without an objective standard? Or the existence of design without a designer? Aquinas argues that the answer to these 5 questions is no. His arguments don't try to tell us everything about God, just that we need God in our picture of reality. In other words, if any of Aquinas' arguments are right, we can't coherently imagine the world without God. By contrast, when we talk about polytheistic gods, there are no such problems with rejecting them. We can coherently imagine the world without those gods. So, my point is that Dawkins makes a category error when he puts the creator god of monotheism in the same category as the lesser gods of polytheism. They're not comparable.
Thank you, Astrid. That was a good summary. Aquinas is perhaps the greatest theologian and philosopher of the so-called Middle Ages. Do you know when he lived?
In the 13th century?
That's right. He worked with these questions about 800 years ago, and his arguments are still hotly debated today. I recommend looking up his 5 ways online and taking time to think about them for yourselves.
I have another question, if that is okay, about the idea of the Trinity. Dawkins accuses Christians of speaking incoherently when it comes to the Trinity. I do not understand the Trinity, but I would say that Dawkins fails to make an argument against it. He just seems to ridicule the idea without trying to understand it.
But isn't it a contradiction to say there is only one God and yet three divine persons?
No, it isn't. Not if you look carefully at the terms used.
What terms? What do you mean?
Can I try? I think Christians will say there's a difference between the terms deity and person, such that a single deity can consist of several persons. Therefore, it's not contradictory to say that God is three divine persons in one personal deity. Is that correct?
Yes, Douglas. God is one divine personal being, but God is not a solitary divine person, because God is necessarily composed of three divine persons: God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit.
But wait, Christians call God He. Doesn't that imply God is one person?
No, it's analogical language based on the idea that the Trinitarian God is personal, not an impersonal it.
Let me just say that Astrid has a point here. Calling God He is not a category error, but a metaphorical use of language, like Shakespeare writing that all the world's a stage. You see?
Okay, thanks. I understand. So Astrid, you say that the belief in the Trinity is fundamentally different from belief in a group of polytheistic gods, like Dawkins suggests.
Yes, it is fundamentally different. The Trinitarian creator in Christian monotheism is very different to the finite and fallible deities of polytheism. The Trinity is basic for all existence and all community. It is a divine unity of love.
Very interesting. The idea of God as Trinity makes me wonder, is love just a subjective byproduct of nature, like an illusion, or is love really rooted in reality, like gravity?
Ah, the million-dollar question.
Yes, it's a really good question. Let me try to say something about that. I have something here. The Welsh philosopher H.P. Owen wrote that the doctrine of the Trinity, quote, reconciles the paradoxical affirmations that God is self-sufficient and that he is love, unquote. It tells us that loving relationships are at the heart of reality. Humans are created in the image of a God who is love, with the purpose to live in loving relationships with God and each other.
Yeah, that sounds nice. But here, Dawkins has a good point, I think. He writes, quote, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music, unquote. So the universe is not a loving place to be, is it? Life is violent and dangerous and a merciless struggle for survival.
Yes, I hear what you say, Douglas. Yet love really seems to be something that ought to shape the dance of our lives. That's what we long for, isn't it? So why do we long for it if it really does not exist?
Wow, that's beautiful, Hiromi.
Let me jump in here for a moment. Today we are talking about paradoxes and contradictions, which are different things, right? What is the definition for the word paradox? Let us see if you can find it. Anyone?
I have something here. A paradox is a statement that is true despite being seemingly self-contradictory, unreasonable, or absurd.
Thank you, Hiromi. So, a paradox is a statement that may look self-contradictory at first glance, but is really not, and even contains a deeper insight when the true meaning is understood. In contrast, a self-contradiction can never be true. This makes paradoxes especially interesting to study in philosophy. Can you see that?
Yes, and I want to add that paradoxes also occur in other areas than philosophy, like physics. The awareness of paradoxes in physics have actually increased with the discovery of phenomena like relativity and quantum physics.
Can I just mention another analogy about the Trinity as a paradoxical truth about God? I have heard someone use music as an analogy, like the difference between a chord and a note. A musical chord is composed of the first, third, and fifth notes of a musical scale. So, the chord of C major is the notes C, E, and G, right? Each note is a sound, but all three notes played together is an even richer sound.
Okay, I see what you mean. God is like the chord, and each person in the Trinity is like the individual notes, right? It kind of makes sense in a strange way.
Okay, so the notion about the Trinity is not incoherent. That's what you say. It could still be false, right? Why think it is true?
Paradoxically, there is much in the Christian worldview I find attractive, and also much I find puzzling, often at the same time.
Okay, thank you, all of you. We have actually run out of time for now. Next time, I'd like to talk more about the question of knowledge. How can we get reliable knowledge? Is science the best way to get true knowledge about reality? Read the next chapter in the book. Astrid, could you prepare a short introduction on the topic for next time? Is that all right?
Okay, sure, I will try.
You have been listening to The Question of God. Has our civilization outgrown God? A 12-episode podcast series from Biocosmos Norway and Damaris Norway. You can find references and resources online. The script by Børge Elliot Benson and Peter S. Williams was adapted from parts of the book Outgrowing God, A Beginner's Guide to Richard Dawkins, and The God Debate by Peter S. Williams, who also composed the music. All voices, including mine, were performed using AI. The sound editor was Børge Elliot Benson.